The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. 5,000 years of wisdom on demand. Get your first month for only 99 cents. Visit Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia.
This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. I am Jim Harold. So glad to be with you once again. We have one of our all-time favorite guests on the line. When you think about protection, maybe you think about a burglar alarm or security system for your house. Maybe you think about some kind of antivirus for your computer. But maybe you should be thinking about protection in another way. Psychic protection. And that's what we're going to talk about today with Rosemary Ellen Guiley. She has a new book out. It's called The Guide to Psychic Protection. And she's going to tell us how to protect ourselves and the threats that may be out there. Rosemary has had extensive experience dealing with the negative forces in her paranormal investigations and research. She is the best-selling author of more than 65 books, including Guide to the Dark Side of the Paranormal and Guide to Psychic Power. She lectures internationally and makes frequent media appearances, including Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. And her websites are visionaryliving.com and visionarylivingpublishing.com. Rosemary, welcome back to the program today. So good to reconnect with you.
It is, Jim. I always love doing shows with you. And, we just have a really good time.
I agree. And I think we're going to have one today. So I'm interested in kind of your experience. I mean, you've delved into these topics for decades and looked at some pretty dark things. Have you yourself felt maybe at times in need of psychic protection and maybe that you were being psychically targeted in some way? Has that happened to you?
I would say yes on both accounts. And some of it is the nature of my work because it brings me into contact with a wide range of people who have varying motives. And for people who are on the dark end of the spectrum, some of them are well-versed in the arts of psychic attack and manipulation, and it becomes easy to be targeted in that regard. And some of it is just related to the paranormal work in general. Actually, all of us, regardless of whether or not we're working in the paranormal, could probably benefit from some tips on how to keep ourselves protected against the negative energy that's out there. And when I do psychic protection workshops, I would say most of the people who come are there because they're having problems with toxic people, not hostile entities. And psychic attack comes from people as well as from spirits and beings. And that's really what most people have to deal with on a daily basis, is the negativity that is flying around them all the time. And in a workplace, it's very hard to escape that.
Now, and that's a scary thought because I think that we kind of have our guard up when it comes to crime, theft, physical assault. If you're a woman, you have a purse a lot of times. If you're walking in a big city, you'll carry it close to you because you're afraid somebody's going to take it. Or, again, you have a security system for your home, or these days with your computer, everybody has 27 different antivirus programs on their computer. So our shields are up. But do we have a tendency to discount psychic attack as just something we read in books and see in movies? And are our guards really up for that? Or are we, most of us, in kind of a shields down position?
Well, psychic attack can be very subtle, and the average person can have a pretty good buffer against it. We might be adversely affected for a little while, but it eventually wears off, whereas other people are going to have more serious problems. And that buffer around us is our energy field. It's the aura. And when we're in good health and we have our self in good emotional order and mental order, we're not constantly thinking depressing and angry thoughts, it sets an energy field around us that just naturally deflects a lot of the negativity bombs that come winging our way. They just kind of pass around us. But many times they do find their mark. And we can be in psychic attack is both unwitting and inadvertent and deliberate. And when people issue from themselves a lot of hostility, negative thought, anger, jealousy, resentment, things like that, those are forms of psychic attack. And if they're directed at a person in an intense enough way and for a long enough period, it can wear down your defenses, and it can get through to you mentally, emotionally, and even physically. Now, there are individuals who are very skilled in the magical arts who know how to do that very well and very quickly. It's a form of psychic vampirism as well. In fact, the two go hand in hand because you're vampirized of your life force when you're under psychic attack. So, a typical encounter of psychic attack would be a confrontation with a very angry, abusive person. That is negative energy in an attack mode that's being directed against you. And depending on the individual, the effects can wear off quickly or linger. If you're repeatedly exposed in that way, that's where the problems start. And then, of course, if you are under a deliberate attack, then you are at a higher risk for bigger problems and more prolonged problems. They can range from just sort of a chronic malaise to feeling depressed, then to having thoughts that you don't feel are your own that might be urging you to do things you don't want to do. Can include nightmares. It can include the onset of physical problems from chronic ailments that don't seem to resolve to more serious health matters. And it can even progress into full physical possession, especially if we're dealing with entities.
It would strike me from what you said that part of this psychic protection is keeping ourselves psychically strong. What are some of the things that happen to us or we allow to happen to us that kind of put chinks in our psychic armor?
Well, certainly being in a chronically depressed state or a frequently angry state. Anger and depression are two of the most damaging things that we can do to ourselves. And they have an effect on the aura, the energy field that's around us. Now, the energy field, and I go into this quite a bit in the book because it is so important. You can arm yourself with amulets up one side and down the other, but if your energy field has been compromised, they're not going to do the job for you of keeping everything at bay. You've got to look after your own energetic and spiritual house. So there are different layers to the aura that govern functions in the body, and they govern psychospiritual functions as well. There's a mental body, a spiritual body, an astral body, an etheric body that deals with our physical health and so on. And so when psychic attack occurs, it has to get through layers of the aura to affect us in the deepest possible way. And the most common reaction to a psychic attack is to feel angry or depressed or fearful. So these are emotional reactions. And sometimes we recover from those ourselves, and then in some cases, they have a lingering effect. The mental body, that's where your thoughts are going to be affected. That's a little more serious. The intrusion of thoughts like you're no good, you're worthless, why don't you go and kill yourself because nobody loves you? Somebody, so-and-so's after you, so you better get them first. These are intrusive thoughts that can have external origins. They can be part of psychic attack. And we have to be careful here to separate normal psychological issues, internal psychological issues, from the external. And sometimes they get mixed together because one will take advantage of the other. When the etheric body is affected, that's the part of the energy field closest to the body, that's when the health issues start. And so if an entity or someone who is deliberate about psychic attack targets a person, there's going to be an effort to breach the energy field. And so if someone has been sick or depressed or angry a lot, we can have weak spots in the aura, kind of thin spots or tears or little rips. And it becomes easy for negative forces to then have an inroad and to latch on. And in fact, energy healers who can see these things in the aura often describe them as hooks, as barbs, as hollow, like tubes or straws. And they all have the purpose of letting something latch on to start drawing off energy and having an influence, or literally sucking the life force from someone. And it's usually not going to be in a major way, because a lot of it, especially if you're dealing with entities, because they're like parasites, they want to feed off you but not kill you. And so it's going to be at a subtler, slower level that might even be below your awareness until you've deteriorated to a certain point.
Now, in the book, you talk about calling on spiritual forces. Is that maybe people who wish us ill calling on spiritual forces? Is it perhaps we can call on spiritual forces to help us and protect us, or is it both?
Well, it really is both. And in the book, I put the emphasis on the defense. You know, what are the spiritual forces that are best for us to call out to as allies and helpers? Now, certainly someone who is skilled in the magical arts, if they're going to, for example, throw a curse on someone or aim a psychic attack, they are going to call upon supernatural help. And these would be the lower level forces that we would call demonic. They would be hostile forces for hire, so to speak, that carry out the energy of the attack or the curse. Our best defenses come from the higher spiritual realms. And there are two that I talk about because that's what most people look to in the book. And one is the angel realm. The angelic forces are available to us. We do have to ask for their help. They're not automatically going to pull our chestnuts out of the fire, but they are pipelines to higher spiritual energy, to the source of all being or the Godhead. And they can help us improve our defense energy around us. They can help us deflect. And they can also help us improve our own inner spiritual house, which is the most important thing of all. And the other that I talk about is the communion of saints. These are individuals who once lived on earth, who achieved a certain spiritual consciousness that exalts them to an intermediary status. And of course, in the Catholic Church, this is by decree. The Church decides who's going to be a saint. But every spiritual tradition and religion has traditions of saints. Highly spiritualized yogis, for example, adepts, and people who have pursued the spiritual path and purified themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, would all be at the same level. So they represent a very powerful intermediary force that can be called upon as well. And I especially give a lot of attention to Saint Benedict. For the reason that Benedict in the Christian canon of saints is probably the number one guy for defense against the demonic, and that's because of his life story. There are legends told about Saint Benedict, about how he would be attacked by the devil and the forces of the devil, uh, during during his life to turn him away from God and spirituality, and how he defeated those. And he was able to defeat those by his own elevated spiritual power and consciousness. And so Saint Benedict is often called upon in exorcisms, in demonic exorcisms. And there are prayers that have been composed to Saint Benedict for this purpose. In fact, one of the popes composed a prayer to Saint Benedict that is part of an exorcism rite, and it is for the intent of expelling unwanted presences from an environment or from a person. And there are many crucifixes, for example, which have been decorated with the medal of Saint Benedict. Every saint has a medallion that's been struck that can be carried as jewelry or lucky charms, those sorts of things. And the Saint Benedict medal is often affixed to things like a crucifix to give some added oomph to an exorcism. Now, one of the things that I do stress in the book about things like crucifixes and medals and amulets, crystals, other sorts of things, is that yes, they do have a power. They have a power because people invest a lot of energy in their connection to the divine. And so they become like batteries of forces, of energy. But they are connectors. And that's one of the things that I try to emphasize to people. They're connectors. They connect you to that power. And so, for example, if you carry a Saint Benedict medal and this to you represents your connection to the divine that helps you repel everything evil, negative, and hostile, then that becomes a battery of energy like that for you. But it's your connection that does the job. So I think it's useful to employ those things. But if people think that the objects are going to do the job for them, it's kind of getting things backwards.
Now, on these programs, we love stories. Is there an example that stands out? Maybe it's one in the book where someone found themselves on the receiving end of not a subtle or kind of not like secondhand smoke, let's put it that way, but someone said, I am going to psychically attack this person, and the fallout that ensued. Do you have any stories like that?
Well, I have a number of them, and some of them going back to stories that were documented in the 19th century. But some of the more contemporary ones, yes, I can think of a story from a woman who she became involved kind of romantically with a man, and she was attracted to him because he seemed to have unusual powers. So some of these people who have the ability to perpetrate psychic attack, they have kind of a magnetic personality around them. And that's one of the things they cultivate because they want to bring people under their influence. And they will often do it through the eyes. I have a whole chapter that I call malevolent staring, which is about the use of eye power to affect people. And so their game is to dominate someone and subjugate them to the point where they can influence these people mentally, psychically, energetically to do their will. And they have different purposes. One might be sexual. One might be just the sheer thrill of domination. It's kind of like a form of psychic enslavement. And another purpose might be directed at, trying to destroy someone. And that's usually in cases where we have grudges and resentments and things like that. But it becomes very difficult to break away from these people once that kind of connection has been made. And this woman does describe, how difficult it was when she realized what was going on, how difficult it was for her to break that connection. And breaking the connection depends on a lot of different factors. It can be an energetic connection. You can have your energy field scanned and repaired and healed. You can do visualization and mental rejection yourself. Sometimes people actually have to put physical distance between themselves and another person. So these sorts of cases do go on all the time, a deliberate psychic attack. There's another form, Jim, that I want to mention too, and that's the unwitting psychic attack. And I think that's quite common. And these are people who have the natural ability just to suck off energy from other people wherever they are. And they don't really consider themselves psychic vampires. In fact, they probably would be mortified to think of themselves that way. They don't even realize what they're doing. But spend some time around these people and you start to feel listless, mentally fogged. Maybe you even want to get away from someone. And you can't quite put your finger on it because it's not anything specific they do or say. It's just simply being in their field of energy. And I included a couple of stories from my own experience along those lines where certain individuals just obliterated my energy after being around them. And I knew it wasn't anything they were doing deliberately, but what unfortunately happens is that people start backing away. They don't want to be friends. They don't want to have contact. And the other person is puzzled and perhaps even hurt by it, thinking that there's something wrong with them. Well, yes, there is. They've got something in their energy field that manages to draw off the energy of other people around them.
I had someone in my life who was familial, and I wanted to be helpful to that person, and I wanted to do well for them. But the person was so hypercritical of everything you did that at some point I limited contact to just the absolute necessities because there was no changing this person. And I had to do it for my own sanity. And again, I don't think this person would have ever thought such a thing. But just the constant negativity and criticism of everybody and everything, it's draining. And I think when we think of something like a psychic attack, we think of somebody standing around a cauldron, putting in various esoteric ingredients and putting a curse on someone. And I'm sure that more deliberate things like that can be part of it. But it could be as simple as somebody who is highly negative, I would think.
It is a form of psychic attack, and that's one of the things that I wanted to mention in the book too, just to raise awareness about what exactly psychic attack is. And you're absolutely right that most people think it's some super whammy supernatural thing that happens that's going to involve demonic forces coming at you, when in fact, quite often it's very subtle and it has an erosive effect. And something like constant criticism can be used to tear down a person's self-confidence and will. Ill-wishing is another form of psychic attack, and that's where you just don't like someone, or you resent them, you're angry at them, you're jealous of them, and so you just, whenever you're around them or you think of them, you think bad things about them, or you wish that bad things will happen to them. And, a lot of times this sort of thinking just goes spinning off into etheric space, and it dissipates because it's not focused. It's not consistent enough. But if it's focused and consistent enough, and this is what often happens in the workplace where people are trapped to interact with individuals who project this kind of energy on a daily basis, that's where some serious issues can come in. So many forms of psychic attack. And of course, one of the best examples historically we have of that is the leading lady on psychic defense, Dion Fortune, who lived from the late 19th into the mid 20th century. She was a very psychically adept person. She joined one of the orders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. She kept company with a lot of very skilled occultists, but she describes in her book, and I use that example myself, how when she was in her 20s and very vulnerable and open, she worked for a woman who practically destroyed her psychically through constant intimidation. And she felt that it had had an impact on her etheric body, which affected her physical health. And she said that it took her a couple of years to bring her health back up on all levels after she left the job. And that really prompted her to learn a lot about how people are psychically affected by other people, deliberately and unwittingly. Now, this woman boss of hers, she had learned a lot of occult techniques while she had lived in India, and Dion Fortune felt that she used them deliberately against her, and they did include malevolent staring. With the constant reinforcement of you're no good, you're wrong, you can't do anything right, I want you to do it this way, your opinion doesn't count, you're going to do as I say, constant things like that. And for some people, it's like Chinese water torture. It's initially you think it's not affecting you, and then after a while, you're practically psychically, ravaged.
Yeah, it's true, and it's very, very interesting. All the better to arm ourselves with Rosemary's Guide to Psychic Protection. We're going to be back talking more about things like amulets, dream and sleep invasion, and we'll be back right after this on the Paranormal Podcast. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. And keep listening, because I'm going to tell you how you can get your first month for only 99 cents. Now, have you ever been in a situation you're kind of surfing around one of those big streaming services and you say, wait, where's the kind of stuff I hear on Jim shows? And you look and you look and you can't find it. Well, there's a good reason for that. You've been looking in the wrong place. You need to check out Gaia, because Gaia is the streaming service made for people like us who love this kind of content. And the great news is that there's so many places you can watch Gaia. There's Apple TV, your iPhone, your iPad, your Chromecast, your Android device, your Fire TV, your Roku, your computer. If you're listening to this podcast, you can watch Gaia. And as I've said many times, there's a lot of video on the internet, sure. But a lot of it is, and this is me saying it, not Gaia, but a lot of it out there on the general internet is garbage, to use a technical term. But the thing is that with Gaia, it's high quality all the way. They create their own great exclusive content, and then they also go out and they curate the best third-party content out there. So with Gaia, you have the best 40 topics on video, and there's something in every realm. Just so much to choose from. And I know that if you give it a chance, you are going to love it. I know it. I have no doubt. And every week I get a spreadsheet from them. They say, Jim, here's what's coming up. And I say, wow, I've got to watch this. And here's some of what you're missing if you're not tuned into Gaia this week. The one that caught my eye this week is a new episode of Open Minds with Regina Meredith. And she's going to talk about tuning the human biofield. Her guest, Eileen Day McCusick, explains that the same electricity which powers the stars also powers the life and vitality of our own bodies. And Eileen says that you can learn to tap into the resonance of the electromagnetic field of the body with a specially tuned tuning fork, and thus untangling blockages in the human biofield. Just fascinating, and things that, no pun intended, open your mind and make you think about different ways of looking at the world. And so much more. I'm looking back to some past episodes, things like Beyond Belief, George Norrie from last month, if you missed out on that, Missing Persons in Portals with David Paulides. I know he's always a very popular guest. And this is all part of his continuing Missing 411 investigations. And on that episode of Beyond Belief, David relayed recent findings on some of the most bizarre missing person cases that he has investigated. And there's shows like Wisdom Teachings with David Wilcock. And, of course, Corey Good is along as well with his programs. And there's just so much great content, plus that third-party content, always something new to watch on Gaia. So here's how you get it. Go to Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim. Now there I've handpicked some shows on UFOs, haunted places, and Bigfoot that I thought you might like. And it's nice because you don't have to sign up for anything or anything. You just go to that page, Gaia.com/Jim, and you'll watch it. And then once you're done, there's a little button and you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents. I mean, that's nothing. 99 cents for a month of great entertainment, education, and really some fantastic video on the topics that we love. I know that you will love it, and I would like for you to check it out and thank them for supporting the shows as well. So go to Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. I love it. You'll love it. Thanks, Gaia.
Bringing you the strange since 2005. We return to the OG of paranormal podcasting himself, Jim Harold.
We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest is Rosemary Ellen Guiley. We're talking about her newest book, The Guide to Psychic Protection, and all how we can protect ourselves from attack, whether it's unintentional or intentional. But before we get to that, I just wanted to mention something, Rosemary. I know you're participating in coming early next year, and it's very exciting. I had an opportunity last year to be on the first Mysteries Cruise with you and some other guests, and it was just a tremendous time. It's done by Mike and Wendy Migliori over at Holiday Maker Travel. Great people. And I know in January, you are going to be having the second Mysteries Cruise with a very special guest, and I thought maybe you'd want to tell folks a little bit about it because I'm a big fan of these cruises, and I highly recommend them. So tell us what's going on with that.
Well, I'm very excited to do another cruise with Wendy and Mike. As you mentioned, they're just great people. And this second Mysteries Cruise is going to feature myself and my very good friend for many, many years, John Zaffis. And John is well known in the paranormal field. He's the nephew of Ed Warren, has had phenomenal experience in the paranormal and especially on the demonic end of things. And of course, he was the star of his own paranormal reality show, Haunted Collector. John has, over the years, collected hundreds and hundreds, well, it's probably into the thousands by now, I'm sure, of objects that have had spirit attachments and problems. And we've done a couple of books about a lot of his collection, Haunted by the Things You Love and Demon Haunted, True Stories from the John Zaffis Vault. I've investigated with John. I consider him a brother. And the chance to do a cruise with him, we've done gigs together in the paranormal field, but to do a cruise with him, just a phenomenal opportunity. So this cruise is going to run from January 3rd through the 7th. The ship will leave, this is a Royal Caribbean ship, the Belle of the Seas. It's going to leave from Tampa, Florida, and go to the Yucatan. And we'll have some playtime in the Yucatan. And meanwhile, on board the ship, we'll be having presentations, panels, social time. It's, I love cruising, and it's just going to be a fabulous experience. So this is the kind of thing that you want to start thinking of and actually booking, because there are some great early bird specials. You go to mysteriescruise.com. It's a great holiday treat for yourself. Ring in the new year. Good idea to get the best cabins nailed down now.
Yeah, and also for those of us in colder climates, a great time to get away too and get down to the warm weather. And it wraps the best elements of a cruise. Plus, you get all of the paranormal knowledge. And I've had John on the program several times. Once, I believe, with you as well for a joint book you had done. And he's a font of knowledge. You're obviously a font of knowledge. So I highly recommend it. Mysteriescruise.com. So we were talking about psychic shields before, or I brought up that term. I don't know if I made that up or not, but this idea of having your shields up. It strikes me that one of the times that our shields might be most susceptible and might be down is when we're sleeping. Is that a part of the picture?
It's definitely part of the picture, Jim. And in fact, dream invasion is one of the most common forms of deliberate psychic attack. And whether it's coming from a human or a non-human source, we are vulnerable when we sleep. And it's no accident that if we're going to have an encounter with something, it's probably going to be in the middle of the night and we wake up from it. The shadow people, for example, who are bedroom visitors, unpleasant ghosts, demonic entities, they all understand the human sleep cycles, and they know when we are at our lowest ebb of defenses. So one of the forms of psychic attack, one of the symptoms of it that manifests is a certain kind of nightmare. Now, everybody has nightmares, and so just a bad dream is not going to be an indication of that. But there are certain kinds of nightmares, and then they repeat. And they usually have a lot of violent imagery in them, bloodshed, being pursued by attackers. That's a very common form of nightmare, by the way. So here again, I caution, you have to know your own dream life to know when something's an ordinary nightmare, so to speak, and something else. But the supernatural ones are particularly terrifying, and they're very realistic. You feel like you're actually having the real experience, and it's about being attacked and bloodied and a lot of death, destruction, and gore and horrific images and things like that. And again, it would repeat. But it's part of a syndrome. So the syndrome then is also phenomena in the house, like poltergeist phenomena, shadow figures, things that weren't present before that are establishing themselves in a negative and scary sort of way. These other things that we've been talking about, like an ebb of energy, feeling kind of debilitated, that there's some sort of unwanted or hostile presence lingering about. It becomes part of a syndrome of things. So with the nightmares, you do have to take a very careful look at them to, just eliminate ordinary anxiety nightmares and make sure that it's not that and something else. Now, for example, take the case of people who are fairly new to paranormal investigation. They go off on a case, and for them, scary things happen because they're not used to them. So they come home and they're kind of in a state of anxiety over that, maybe even fearful, worried that something followed them home. Having a nightmare after a situation like that is not uncommon. It's just an expression of the fear and anxiety that got stirred up. But these psychic attack nightmares are different in terms of their realism, their intensity, and again, I emphasize the repetition.
Amulets. You said before, if you don't have the right frame of mind, if you're depressed, if you have anxiety, these different things can bring your defenses down. You could have, I don't know if it was a jacket full of amulets or something like that, you said. But where do amulets come into play, and where can they be useful?
They can be useful on the person and in the environment. And here again, it's your connection, it's your emotional connection to what this object represents. And objects can be empowered with your own energy. I talk about in the book how to charge amulets yourself with your own intention as a protective sort of thing. So the most common are different kinds of crystals. If you're trying to eliminate negative energy, black stones like hematite, a black agate, obsidian, a jet. These all have very long reputations for absorbing and deflecting negative energy. Clear quartz crystals help to establish a more stabilized energy. Amethyst also is very good for clear thinking as well. So crystals can be carried on the person. They can be placed in a work or home environment, sort of like psychic air fresheners. Another very popular one is smoky quartz. And smoky quartz, especially when worn on the person, is considered to be a good deflector of negative energy, like if you're engaged in questionable sites for paranormal investigation. We talked about saint metals earlier. Many people carry and wear saint metals. I have a St. Christopher's medal in my car for safe journeys. I have a St. Benedict crucifixes. I have angel connections as well. And I quite often wear a medal it's called the sigil or seal of an angel. Sigils they look like magical symbols, and that's what they are. They're kind of a shorthand for invoking the energy of that particular angel. And the most popular for protection is Saint Michael. He's our defender against the forces of darkness. He's got a sword and a shield, and he's a warrior angel. And so he is most commonly called upon. And there is a very effective prayer, the prayer to the Archangel Saint Michael, a Catholic prayer that's very commonly invoked as a defense against negative forces. I also like Uriel. Because Uriel, one of the lesser known archangels, represents truth and the fire of truth. And my feeling is that negativity, whether it's human generated or spirit generated, is defeated by the forces of unconditional love, the light from the Godhead, and absolute truth. These are very powerful forces that can be brought to bear against anything negative. So I have medals for the big four archangels. That would be Gabriel, Raphael. Gabriel is the angel associated with the Annunciation, and so represents something new and powerful and spiritual coming into being. I think Gabriel is a good angel to invoke in a cleansing or after a cleansing has been done. And Raphael, of course, is associated with healing and also is a powerful force to be invoked for the healing process that takes place after someone is recovering, especially from a serious psychic attack. Michael is defensive and protective, so is Uriel. And so I wear these medals a lot. I wear them quite frequently when I lecture. I wear them when I'm doing paranormal and psychic work. And again, it's not that I think the medal does it for me in terms of like, well, if I wear this medal, I'll be protected. But the medal in physical contact with me it activates that energetic connection that by wearing the medal, for example, of Michael, I am connected in a powerful way, energetically, to what Michael represents, which is the vanquishing of evil and protection against the forces of darkness. And I think that's how we need to look at amulets. And of course, there are many other amulets that come from many cultures. The evil eye amulets are very popular in the East, usually a round blue, literally an eye. The Egyptians used the Eye of Horus as an amulet against evil, and they wore it as a protection against negative forces. So human beings throughout history have believed in the power of energized objects or symbols that represented something from the spiritual realm as a layer of protection or something that could be called upon in a time of need.
What do you think about things like burning sage, smudging, those kind of things? What are your thoughts?
Well, with sage, incense are used as a way of getting rid of unwanted forces. This is why in Catholic Mass the censer is swung. It's to clear the air of negative and demonic forces. And so sage can have a cleansing effect. Sage itself, in my opinion, is not going to get rid of heavy-duty negative forces. It can rid the environment of wispy, clingy energy or some lesser forces. It's a component of remedies, but I don't think it can be relied upon as the only remedy. So there are different kinds of incenses as well that also have this kind of banishing effect. Frankincense and myrrh, for example, are very popular. And there is an incense called Cyflora flaxo, which is quite pungent. And in fact, in my opinion, it repels people as well as any entities around. It's that strong. So I don't use that myself. I tried to use it, and it was so overpowering that I couldn't even keep it in the house.
Oh, that's
I ordered some. I ordered a big box of it, and it started stinking up the house, even from the basement.
it was repelling you as well.
It was repelling all the people as well as everything else. So they're part of the toolbox of things. Let's say, for example, that there's been a hostile presence in a home environment and it's had a psychic attack effect upon the inhabitants. Well, they need to have their auras repaired and cleansed. And something like sage helps to restore and balance the energy in the household. So it's one of the things to use.
Well, it is fascinating, and I think if we delve into these things, and even if we're not big dabblers into the occult and things, I think that along with our protection for our home, our protection for our property, our protection for our computers, it makes sense to me that we should have psychic protection, and thus the guide to psychic protection. So, Rosemary, the question is, where can people find the guide to psychic protection, and where can they find more information about everything you do?
The book is available on Amazon in print, in selected bookstores, and also in ebook format on Kindle Nook, iBooks, and Google Books, Google Play, and Kobo. My personal website is visionaryliving.com, and I have a new website called visionarylivingpublishing.com, which features all the books and authors who are in my publishing program, and there's also information about the book there as well.
Well, it's been a great discussion, and I wouldn't expect anything less because it's always a delight to spend some time with Rosemary Ellen Guiley. Rosemary, thank you again for your time today.
And thank you, Jim.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that show as much as I did. I always like getting together with Rosemary. She really knows her stuff. She is a great resource and a great guest and a good friend. So we're always glad to speak with her. And we're always glad to spend some time with you. Thank you for spending some time with us. If you want to know how you can access all of the shows back to 2005, check out my Paranormal Plus Club at jimharoldplus.com. That's jimharoldplus.com. We have a great sale going on right now where you can get your first month for only $2.95. We thank you so much. We'll talk to you next time. Have a great week, everybody, and stay spooky. Bye-bye. Now for the legal disclaimer. We do not accept money from publishers or content producers in exchange for interviews. However, as with most media outlets, in the majority of cases, we do receive complimentary copies of books and DVDs that we feature on our podcasts. Your purchases of books, DVDs, and other items via our Amazon.com links benefit Jim Harold and jimharold.com and help us continue our programming. The sponsor messages you hear on the programs are paid endorsements, although we really do like them. For the full disclaimer, go to jimharold.com, and thanks for listening.